Welcome everyone. It's great to see such a good turnout for what's going to be a really exciting presentation, because this is an exciting time for North Ronaldsay. As you've heard, there are developments with the wool mill, there's developments with meat, and indeed they fit into a kind of big pattern that, as we've been hearing in other areas in the north and the west, are happening with native sheep. We're going to get hot from the newsroom. First of all, the latest developments, because Luke Fraser is the Community Development Manager for North Ronaldsay. Luke has an extensive background in local government, particularly housing, and he's going to tell us now what's happening about the sheep and the meat and the mill and Trebb. Luke, welcome.
Good morning. I'm just here to give a little bit of background just on the current project, and then some of the other guys will come in and fill you in on the sheep-specific stuff. So this is Trebb. This is our £2 million community hub that's been developed in North Ronaldsay. It's got various elements to it. First off, we've got a two-bedroom flat, so there's a real housing issue like there is in most rural and island communities, and we're trying to address that and bring some additional housing stock. We've also got a gym and a wellbeing hub, which is something that the island has kind of wanted for a good number of years. We've got a hot desk and a meeting room space. The one thing COVID kind of did give us that was a positive was the ability to work remotely. So we've got to trying to attract new residents, but we also want to make sure we've got that facility, that resilience there. That's the hot desk and meeting space. We are then also looking at the wool mill and the meat larder. So that big steel frame you can see there, that is the wool mill going up. It is beyond there. We'll see some photos in a minute, but that's just the wool mill and the meat larder on that side. We also have a community transport garage. It's going to form part of the same shed that the meat larder's in. And finally, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. They're using one of the garages as their fire station, and I'm being waved at. All right, so that is where we're at the moment. £2 million project. The scale of the project was key to getting the contractors involved. It's difficult to deliver large projects or small individual projects on islands like North Ronaldsay, just because there's so much work ongoing in Orkney. It's hard to attract contractors. So the scale of the project was something that really brought the contractors in. The breadth of the project was key to attracting funders and also providing that economies of scale to make the project viable. It's difficult delivering a two-bedroom property, but when you've actually got the ability to balance funding across various different things, it was really helpful. So these are all our funders. We've got UK government funding from the Community Ownership Fund. We got Scottish government funding from various different funds there as well, Scottish Land Fund, Sport Scotland, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and also a number of council funds as well. So lots of really good money coming in, lots of funders buying into the idea. This is just an aerial view of the site, so it shows you again what each of the different elements are. We're also looking at renewables, so we're looking at solar PV and battery, and also potentially turbines on site as well as a couple of electric vehicle chargers too. So we're trying to deliver some of those elements on the site. The airfield is just to the bottom of this, so it's a very central site, right slap bang in the middle of the island. The aim is also things like community resilience as well. So the hope is that we can disconnect some of these renewables from the grid, and we can actually, if there's power outages, we've got the ability to keep the lights on in this facility if possible. This is a photo, and a more up-to-date photo. This shows the wool mill facing back towards Trebb. So it's well underway at the moment, a lot of work ongoing on the inside, which shows you the inside of the space. It is a very large space compared to the existing wool mill. It's a number of times larger. It's kind of divided up into different sections, and this plan, the red dot here shows you where the outside photo was taken from. The blue dot shows you the internal, and two of those 5-metre bays, which are the gaps between these large the red steel uprights. The two at the top, that is the storage area, so we're finally getting some proper storage on site. The existing wool mill is up at the lighthouse. It's a much smaller space. It was created in the 90s. It's got so much equipment rammed in there, there's not really the potential for storing stuff effectively and efficiently. So this gives us that ability to store things. The middle 3 bays, about 15-16 metres there, that's the actual mill itself, where the work will be done. Again, gives a lot more space and allows for the proper work on there. And we've also then got a small office, toilet, and then actually a visitor centre area as well. We do a lot of wool tours. A key part of our cruise offering, and we've had 8 cruise ships in this year. The wool mill is a key part of our cruise offering, so we'll be bringing people down for that from the cruise ship as well, and we've got a bit of a visitor centre there. This blue rectangle, this is where the meat larder is. So again, it's a 30-metre shed. I'll show you an internal plan of that in a moment. And what James will be speaking about later, the kind of abattoir, little abattoir trailer is going to be sitting in that position where that red rectangle is too. This is an external of the meat larder. This shows, you'll see all these, all the windows and things on the back. We don't need those just now, but we're trying to future-proof the building. So we're putting our community transport vehicle in there. Those of you who know North Ronaldsay, there's nowhere you can't see the sea from, so everything rusts quite quickly. So we've got a nice new van. We're putting that in there to try and preserve that as long as possible. So that'll be make up the door here on the left, and then the meat larder is the kind of door on the right. And that shows you the plan here. So we've actually future-proofed it. Sorry, it's not the best picture. But that office here at the back, we're not putting an office in there at the moment, but we've put those windows and that door in there so we can future-proof that space. So all we need to do will be put some insulation on the inside, put a couple of stud walls in, and we've then got some additional office space if we needed it, and we could heat that as well. So that gives what we're trying to do with this project is future-proof it so that we can spend some money now. We built the biggest shed as we possibly can, because you can guarantee in 6 months' time when we built a small shed, somebody will come back and say they wanted a bigger shed. So we've built the biggest facility we can, and we're future-proofing that as best as possible as well. Additional phases on the site, we also own the land around it, so we'll be looking at potential for community growing and other things as well, potential future housing phases as well. So this is very much phase one, and we are looking at potential other options as well as we go forward. And that is me, so I'll hand over to the next.
Now you see what a remarkable achievement this is, and why we wanted to start with the news. Had that news been coming maybe about an island with several hundred people, even a development on the outskirts of Kirkwall, you would be thinking, wow, this is something. This is an island of 70 people with an immense resource which was untapped and for long was not fully recognized, because the native seaweed-eating sheep, some 2,000 of them, were thought to be by the commercial world for many years too small, not in any way comparable with the big fat sheep and the higher wool-yielding sheep. And then the community of council of the island, the whole community of the island rallied round and decided that rather than sell the wool off the sheep to be dumped really by the wool marketing board, and then for knitters to have to pay a high price for yarn, they would take the middle step of sending away the wool to be spun. But that meant the community council had to first of all buy the wool from the growers, send it away to be spun, and then sell it commercially. That led to forming a wool marketing company called A Yarn from North Ronaldsay. Then the question came, could they spin it themselves on the island? And once again, the modern world was talking about huge wool mills, but they learned about a small company in Prince Edward Island which had developed machinery for small-scale wool mills. It was then put into the lighthouse, because when the lighthouse went automatic, the community had the chance to buy it, and that's how the North Ronaldsay Trust was set up. The meat has been developed to the high-quality market, and as we'll hear later, a key piece in the jigsaw has now been fitted in. But I mentioned the sheep because the sheep are the basis for this all. And we've got with us Michael Scott, who's the clerk to the Sheep Court. Michael's day job is in law, where his training is. His family tradition is very much in sheep management, so he sees both the administrative side of the sheep and the practicalities. And Michael's going to tell us a bit about the management of that fascinating seaweed-eating native flock of sheep.
Okay, thanks, Howie. Right, the bad news is I'm a lot less tech-savvy than Luke, so Lord knows what's going to happen here. Can folk hear me okay, first of all? Yeah? No? I can move closer. There we go. Is that better? Okay, Right. So, 200 years ago, these small, short-tailed sheep were common all over Orkney, but land squaring reduced numbers dramatically, and then crossbreeding for size and yield effectively brought an end to the breed. That's everywhere except North Ronaldsay. So, how did they survive in North Ronaldsay, and why are they living on seaweed? As with most things, we're looking at a combination of factors, and I will start with the kelp industry. The gathering and burning of seaweed, or tangles, to produce kelp was highly profitable in Orkney in the 1700s. It made a lot of money for the big landowners, or lairds as they were called, and it also put some money into the pockets of islanders for the first time. North Ronaldsay is one of the smallest of the Orkney Islands, but its shallow, tidal beaches means that there's an abundance of seaweed, or weir. And that's why in 1727, James Trail bought the island. And North Ronaldsay didn't disappoint. It produced around 1/10 of the total amount of kelp exported from Orkney over the next 100 years or so. It's a massive proportion. Such was the demand for kelp that the population of the island rose to over 500 souls, all packed into 2.5 square miles. Then, in the early 1800s, the kelp industry collapsed completely. There was more than one reason, but the defeat of Napoleon in 1815 and the subsequent reopening of old trade routes giving access to alternative markets was pretty much the decisive factor. Inefficient land management, which had been of no real concern during the kelp boom, became the focus of attention. Dr. William Trail, who was the laird at the time, was a man who was open to new ideas. And in 1832, he had a hard-headed factor in charge of the estate who was willing to take all necessary steps. The factor abolished the run-rig or rig-a-boot system with its scattered or unenclosed fields. He reorganized the crofts into geographically compact holdings and set the pool of newly available manpower to work, building enclosure dykes, draining waterlogged fields, and crucially, he got them to heighten and close the gaps in the dry stone dykes that edged the island. It was known that the sheep would graze on seaweed if the need arose, but the laird's experiment was to put them out onto the shore and keep them there, forcing them to survive almost exclusively on seaweed. Some of the dyke would already have been in place, but in 1832, that was the year that the dyke surrounding the island was made sheep-tight, and that was the year the shore around the island became a communal sheep run, and the land inside the dyke was cleared of sheep. The rough and ready experiment exceeded beyond all expectation, as sheep quickly adapted to their harsh new environment. They became tidal. Twice a day, the retreating waves act like a kind of alarm clock, and down into the ebb they go to enjoy the fresh weir. This skill is less essential during the darker months, when winter storms will throw up an abundance of nutrient-rich weir, and that abundance means the sheep are actually in peak condition during the winter months. The sheep became extremely efficient at extracting copper from seaweed, copper being a necessary part of their diet. The downside is that they are susceptible to copper poisoning if they spend too much time on grass. Restricted to the shoreline, you can also see how fiercely territorial they are, sticking to their own patch of the beach, or cloud young, as we call it. Put a Southyard sheep to the north of the island, and it'll be back home in its own cloud young before you know it. They're extremely sure-footed, quite goat-like in fact, and very athletic. And last but not least, they are wild. You'll often hear them referred to as semi-feral. I'm not sure that goes far enough. My father always tells people that the first thing they need to understand about these sheep is that they are evil. It's an evil sheep. And this, from the Orkney Herald in 1886, this is where there's a complaint about sheep being tied on a boat, and the explanation given was that if they hadn't been tied, they would have been overboard in half a minute and over the hill like hares. It's a very familiar description. So it seems the breed were always a bit on the wild side, not just the seaweed that caused it. There's no doubt they're also highly intelligent. They probably always were, but keeping them on the right side of the sheep dyke when the grass starts to grow in spring is a battle of wits, and I have to say it's a battle of wits that we do not always win. Although I called it the sheep dyke, and that's how it's commonly referred to these days, on the island it was always the banks dyke or the nest dyke that was spoken about. Whatever we call it, the dyke that encircles the island is now an A-listed monument. Although having an A-listed structure that can have miles of its length torn down by the sea in any given year, and that needs not only constant rebuilding, but sometimes actual relocation, gave Historic Environment Scotland now, quite a headache until they agreed to recognise it as a living monument, and I think that's actually quite a good description. There are 12 stone enclosures built into the dyke at various strategic points around the island. These are called punds, and several times a year the sheep are carried along the beach and into these punds. This is the old lighthouse pond. It's an amazing location, but tricky to get to, not the easiest one to work in. There we have Tammy Netherlinny at Joe Roo, just along from the lighthouse pond. And this is at Bridesness, on the east side of the island. Bertie Thompson's the sheepman in this picture. Bertie, no longer with us, was a huge fan of the North Ronaldsay sheep. How we mentioned the fat, high-yielding sheep at the start in his introduction. Bertie hated the fat, high-yielding sheep. He thought they were boring. He loved the fact that the North Ronaldsay ones were all individuals and no two alike. During the winter, there are punds for shipping and butching. In spring, there's the pre-lamb pundings, when the ewes are taken inside to lamb. And in summer, we have the clipping punds or the shearing punds. We pund during stream tides, and that's when there's a new or a full moon, and at high tide, when the strip of shoreline is at its narrowest. Punding's weather dependent and takes place over several days as we work our way around the island, working up the west coast, coming down the east. Friends and relatives are forever getting in touch to find out the punding dates. Punding dates are a very big thing, so they can arrange their holidays. I've even had people get in touch to make sure their island wedding didn't conflict with the punding. Responsibility for organising the punding lies with the North Ronaldsay Sheep Court. What, you might ask, is the North Ronaldsay Sheep Court? Well, the Sheep Court was set up to enforce the North Ronaldsay sheep regulations, first drawn up in 1839, so 7 years after the dyke was made complete. It was done on behalf of the laird by his factor in consultation with the sheep owners. Things change, even in North Ronaldsay, and every 50 years or so, the regulations have been updated to reflect changing circumstances. By way of example, in 1839, the first set of regulations, any crofter who gave up his right to keep sheep was freed from the burden of ever having to keep up the outside dykes. But by 1968, the keeping of sheep was no longer a necessity, and the island's population had fallen so dramatically that when the regulations were updated that year, all tenants were made responsible for the upkeep of the dyke in proportion to the number of sheep they were entitled to hold, whether or not they chose to keep any. It may surprise you to hear that the island still has a laird, still a trail actually, and the laird still owns the beach and the foreshore. The Sheep Court's authority derives from the laird, but the role of the Sheep Court nowadays, in my view, is less about enforcement and more about facilitating the good management of the flock, setting the pund dates and arranging for repairs to the sheep dyke. I was at the North Ronaldsay Archives at the island's new Kirk last week, and I should say newly renovated, just reopened building, and the displays look amazing, well worth a visit. But anyway, at the archives I came across this, where you'll see in 1853 it's quite clear that the regulations were not being followed to the satisfaction, and the threat was there to get rid of the sheep entirely. So, not just the sheep that were a bit wild, maybe. Nowadays, matters are handled a lot less dramatically through discussion and cooperation, and the current laird is extremely supportive of what she recognises to be a hugely important aspect of the island's heritage. Now, the island does have an ageing population, and some of the sheep owners on the Sheep Court are creeping up in years. But that can be a good thing. It certainly means there's a huge amount of accumulated knowledge around the table whenever the Sheep Court convenes. And working with North Ronaldsay sheep isn't just the preserve of a few elderly islanders. The flocks have been handed down from generation to generation for centuries now, and there always seems to be a new generation coming along with an interest in working with the sheep. The communal management of these generational flocks is one of the ties that binds the community together, and it gives something of real value to young islanders who may have left the island but somehow know in their bones just how important it is for them to remain connected. The current sheepmen and sheepwomen are just the most recent links in a long, long chain, custodians of an ancient breed and a communal way of working that has all but died out everywhere else. And they are acutely aware of the responsibility they have both to the past and to the future. And I think that's probably as good a way as any to end. So I hope that you all now know a little bit more about the North Ronaldsay sheep, their history and their management. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. And as he said, you can imagine the work involved in maintaining a sheep dyke that's between 12 and 13 miles long right round the island. But there is new help on the horizon. In fact, for the last 10 years, new help has been coming through the North Ronaldsay Sheep Festival. And Tim Ross, who with his wife Heather is joint director of the festival, and Tim also is the head of the Papawestry School. Tim is going to tell us a bit about that wonderful work of the Sheep Festival in developing and maintaining the dyke.
Hold on to those thoughts about community and maintaining small community identity, because it's the centre of why we're running the Sheep Festival. Arrow keys? Yep. Oh no. So the Sheep Festival, as Howie said, has been running for about 10 years now. I say about 10, we've kind of discussed when it started properly, but we're calling this the 10th anniversary this year. This is last year's volunteers coming to the island to help rebuild that dyke. It's grown into this. The Orcadian added a word to my write-up of this year's Sheep Festival. They called it Orkney's premier voluntourism event. I'd written the article, and the only word they added to the whole thing when they edited it was the word premier. It is a voluntourism event. These people are coming from far and wide, the west coast of the US in Oregon, Germany, all over Europe in the last decade to come and join and do 6 hours of manual labour a day to help with what Michael's described and help to maintain this dyke. So the sheep dyke, I don't need to introduce now because Michael told us construction started 1832, is that right, Michael? Finished in 1832. The yellow line here is useful. It shows just how close to the perimeter of the island it runs. It's close to 13 miles long, and in 1999 it was added to the list of Category A monuments by Historic Environment Scotland. Michael described the challenge. This isn't the cathedral. You'd struggle to change the cathedral. You'd struggle to get much work done. If you want to add a new front door to the cathedral, you're going to get some challenge over whether that's the right thing to do or not. This is a monument which is of equal stature in Historic Environment Scotland's listing structure, but it's not possible to just maintain it exactly as it is. It's exposed to the weather, it's exposed to the elements, and whether a small bit of the dyke comes down at random or whether a huge storm passes through and takes down a long stretch, the only thing to do is replace it and put it back. And how do you do that? Now, I've said it's a monument. it's also an absolutely active farming structure. It keeps the sheep in place, it keeps them out of the fields, it keeps them on the beach, it keeps them eating seaweed that they need. This is the Gearoo Pond again. I've been to the same archive that Michael's been to. I considered the picture of the two gentlemen with their flat caps as well, and a comparison with Gavin and Michael's brother Graham wearing their baseball caps, modern day Ronaldsay punding wear. I went for this comparison instead. This is Laura Doyle. Laura is the youngest sheep owner in the island. Here she is looking for twin-year sheep up at Gearoo. Of course, there's none there because, as Michael says, it's not their part of the island. They're not going to be there. They're going to have headed home. I don't know how old this picture is, Michael, but it's my historical comparison. I must try and find out. So it's an important barrier. The punds are in regular use 2 or 3 times a year we're punding, and it's critical that they're maintained to be able to continue the traditional approaches of farming. Why is maintenance required? We said it might be a storm, it might just be sheer age, it might be rabbits undermining the dyke in the sandy areas of the island. That's probably going to be a problem in the years ahead. There's areas of the dyke built upon sand, and you can just see the rabbit warrens beneath. Historically, how was this handled? Numbers, sheep owners. The dyke would have been split up into sections, and depending where you live, you and your neighbours would be responsible for maintenance of a certain area or certain areas. And it would rely on people pulling together to go and deal with issues quickly and reactively. Why is that a challenge now? It is a challenge now. The population of the island has dropped dramatically since this dyke was built. If we're down at 70 now, were we up at 400 odd at the time, Michael? And so you had an in-house workforce. You had an in-house workforce who, most of whom cared because they owned sheep. You had an in-house workforce of people of an age who can do that work. And the difference now is that there are fewer different owners of sheep. Most of the current sheep owners, as Michael said, are growing older in age. Their families often have gone off for education. You have to go to the grammar school to get to secondary school. And so you get that taste of Kirkwall. We want people to go to university and become doctors, lawyers, physiotherapists. But there's a huge draw to come back and help mum, dad, granddad, and we'll come back to that. Nowadays, there's probably, as always, a responsive approach. If a piece comes down, there's a responsive approach to putting it back. If it's small, manageable, critical, there's probably a role that fencing plays nowadays that didn't exist in the past. If a long stretch of dyke comes down, there's no way it can be put back up in-house on the island within days. So you end up with situations like the left-hand side of the comparison here. A fence gets put up possibly. How long is it going to be there? There's places on the original line of the sheep dyke with fencing in place that's been there for 20, 30 years, and it's functional, it works, it becomes accepted, and it does the job, realistically. It does keep the sheep in where they're meant to be. But it's not what we all want. It's not the traditional way. And so the Sheep Festival helps here. The Sheep Festival had its roots in a sort of people reaching out after seeing North Ronaldsay on Countryfile and getting public exposure, and people wanted to come and help. So it was a week-long voluntary effort, coordinated by people who care passionately about the island. It's a social week. There's an offer there to make people want to come so they can enjoy their week, so they can get a taste of what Orkney's about, but not just Orkney, the smallest islands of Orkney with these unique, wonderful community sort of feels that you can't get elsewhere, and people keep coming back for that time and time again. Tom Quinn here works for the Scottish Government in Edinburgh, back for his 3rd year. He's going to keep coming back every year for as long as we do this festival. Thomas works at Sutherland's Pharmacy. He's a photographer, he's an artist. This is ideal. This is his fodder, you know. Howie's not been for a few years, but maybe he'll be back next year. Who's involved? All types of people are involved. This is Laura in the middle. Laura's mum volunteered at the Bird Observatory 10 years ago, and she's back adding her own PD stones. There's people like Robert Brewis. This is Robert, passionate about North Ronaldsay Sheep, owns North Ronaldsay Sheep in the south of England, and is the treasurer for the Orkney Sheep Foundation. Foundation. Remember what the F is. And he comes every year. This is Kate Trail. You recognise the name Trail? Kate is the daughter of the current laird. She's been the festival director for a number of years now. John Scott, the most wonderful man, the chair of the North Ronaldsay Trust. Here's my auntie. Here's Henry Memmott from the Kirkwall Grammar School. Granddaughter of the current laird. Here's Benji, who lives on the island and came to the island to help maintain the dyke. All sorts of people are interested in this, and they're all very welcome. We make it welcoming by making it accessible. The ethos is working at your pace, within your means, and there's no pressure whatsoever. Take a break, stop and admire the view, walk and go and see the Brock, come back 20 minutes later. We want it to feel achievable. Teamwork makes the dream work. Whether you're coming up and you want to go home feeling stronger, lifting the biggest rocks with 5 other people, brilliant, critical for the foundations of the dyke. Down here we've got a production line where we're working on this really steep piece, and the stone doesn't get up to the top itself. So, quickest way, teamwork makes the dream work. Using readily available stone is key. I guess one of the selling points is this is the same stone that the original dyke was built with. It's always been that way. It leads to different styles of dyke building as you go around the island. If there's a beach that only has smaller rounded stone, harder to build with. If there's a beach that has this sort of stuff, just unlimited supply of flat on top, flat on bottom, triangular, flat-faced stone, oh, it's wonderful. It just goes tick, 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 tick. So it's, and that brings us to the top, sensitive restoration. It is a case of looking what the dyke is like within the stretch you're working on and aiming to reproduce the same style, because we want to maintain that Category A listed monument as sensitively as we can. It's been described as living, organically evolving. It is moving, it is slightly moving, because we need to put it on a firm foundation if we're going to build it again. There's no point building something that's going to come down within 6 months. We want to build dyke that will last as long as the people who built it in the first place. This gives a bit of a feel for sort of what a day is like. It's always sunny, it's always blue sky. If it's not sunny and it's not blue skied, we just don't build dyke. We all stay inside and do something else. But this gives you a feel. Often we're working on a stretch 50 to 100 metres long at a time to allow people space to spread out and take it safely. Find yourself a stretch and work on it for the day with a team. And the satisfaction of sitting on it at lunchtime and having your photo taken and sitting on it at the end of the day when it's this tall. We're talking dyke this tall. We're not talking field boundaries. Occasionally we call in help. This is up on the west side, close to Westness. This particular piece of stretch of dyke, not a lot of readily available stone on part of it. You can see the sandy beach in the area. And this is Ian DL, who, big supporter of the Sheep Festival, helping move stone, just a matter of a few hundred meters, but the work saved, not having to lug that by hand, incredible. Am I on time still? I've got 2 minutes. We could have subscribed 5 times over this year. We had 40-ish people come from away from Orkney for the festival. We had 64 adult volunteers this year and 10 under-18s at some point on the dyke. 654 person hours of work, 120 metres of dyke-ish, possibly more this year. It's about 5 people building for an hour puts up a metre of dyke this high, this wide. Since 2015, I'd really love to map the work because we're absolutely sure it's more than a mile of dyke out of 13 that has been worked on and put back together during the course of the festival. One of the ponds that Michael referred to has also been rebuilt in that time, a pond that had come down and without putting back up would never have existed, and it's one we use all the time, isn't it, Michael? It is a week of celebrating the island too. We aim and hope for people to meet people and meet local islanders and have a good time. There's a barbecue, football, a dance. This is the North Ronaldsay team successfully having just beaten the world this year in the football match. And this is a high standard. Like, I've played Orkney football, and this is top of the B-League standard football. Like, it's a quality game for North Ronaldsay. Dance lessons ensure that the dance on the Saturday evening is an absolute cracker because we've learnt them all the night before in the sunshine. And then you've got a hall full of people who are not from Orkney up at the first dance ready to roll. And you should see the faces sort of, how do they know what they're doing? And we're practically finished. This comes from that same archive set. And I'll aim to reproduce this one day too. This is how it's always been. The bairns there helping out. The adults looking for their sheep in amongst it. Look how many people there are. And real community coming together. It still happens like that. These are our heroes now. The dyke is central to this sort of triangle of maintaining an identity and a culture. And Howie says, stop, but I'm going to go for 30 more seconds. The dyke's at the centre of this, the sheep and the people. These are our people now that we look up to. They're our heroes, some of the current sheep owners. And that's why people keep coming back to help. And Howie's there, right-hand side of the top picture. This was last year's volunteers, and I guess come and join us next year. We sell out fast. We'll probably advertise in late January, early February for next year's festival. Thank you very much.
It really is totally recommended. Now, the wool mill is the missing piece in the jigsaw between the fleece of the sheep and the spun yarn. That leaves a missing piece in the jigsaw between the sheep and the meat. And it's a huge missing piece in Orkney because, of course, there's no abattoir. Strange thing, when an abattoir runs, we really don't like to think about it or visit it or speak about it. When it's not there, my goodness, we miss it. That missing piece in the jigsaw looks like coming together for the smaller demands of sheep, particularly like the native North Ronaldsay sheep. And I'm delighted that Jane Cooper, who's been the driving force in this, is here with us to tell us about it.
I'm going to start talking while we get the images sorted. So, yes, I'm Jane Cooper. I'm a member of the Orkney Borroway Cooperative Limited. Borroway sheep are the rarest breed in the UK, and they're from the same family of primitive sheep as the North Ronaldsay sheep. I started producing mutton. Yeah. I have to have a picture of the book. That's, you know, my publisher insists on it. I started producing mutton from these slow-growing sheep in 2016, driving them the short distance to the old Orkney abattoir. In 2018, Orkney abattoir suddenly closed. I can't overestimate the incredible difficulties this created for several farming businesses in Orkney, with some closing down. We only survived by working all the Orkney Borroway farms together. As well as mutton, which is in very high demand throughout the UK, we also produce Orkney Borroway salami and Orkney Borroway haggis. Premium mutton demands sheep that are calm and relaxed before stunning and slaughter. So we transport them ourselves the long distance to Munro's abattoir in Dingwall. The day starts before 5 a.m. with loading the sheep and driving to Stromness for the Northlink ferry. That alone costs over £220, and that's for a maximum of 18 sheep. Another 110 miles driving down the A9 before we can deliver the sheep, and we unload them ourselves at Munro's. We then drive back north and have the interminable wait for the evening ferry back to Orkney. The cost of this is considerable, and we only keep our farms profitable by maximising income from wool, tanned skins, tanned leather, and horn products. Orkney desperately needs an abattoir, and Orkney Mart is hoping to achieve this. There have been several feasibility studies done on a new small abattoir for Orkney, and while I very much support this happening, it's not going to be soon. The last estimate I saw from 2 years ago was over £1 million. But with the experience of using a distant abattoir and transporting sheep, I decided that what we needed wasn't just an Orkney abattoir, but an on-farm abattoir at our farm at Burnside. This will provide exemplary welfare standards for the sheep, which can be slaughtered on the farm itself. Mutton sheep from the other farms in the Orkney Borroway Cooperative will spend the last weeks or months of their lives at Burnside. On-farm slaughter will also enable an exceptional level of sustainability, with far more byproducts being able to be used, in addition to skins and horns. A local soap maker can make soap from waste abdominal fat. Black pudding can be made from blood. Bone needles and shawl pins for crafting from the lower leg bones, and raw dog food from the offal and guts not suitable for human consumption. Our aspiration is for the only abattoir waste to be the head and spinal cord. We only need this on-farm abattoir to be able to slaughter sheep, so the scale of the infrastructure necessary is considerably smaller than that required for cattle and pigs. Colin Risbridger is curriculum leader at the University of Highlands and Islands in Orkney. When he visited the farm last year and heard what I was planning, he suggested looking at whether such a tiny abattoir could be made movable. As you've heard, North Ronaldsay desperately needs a local slaughter solution for their sheep. After much research about what happens in other countries, especially Nordic countries, the concept of the tiny trailer abattoir was born, TTA. Andy Gray is the designer. He's a catering butcher, slaughterman, and has experience designing and building movable and modular abattoirs. The TTA will consist of 2 trailers, a slaughter unit, and a chiller unit that will hold up to 20 carcasses. These trailers will dock together back to back when in operation, with the hanging rail continuous between the two. Each trailer will be 5 metres in length, can be towed by a car, and they are suitable for being lifted on and off the North Ronaldsay ferry. This is not a mobile abattoir. Each site where the TTA will operate will have to be licensed for use by all relevant regulatory bodies, just as if it were a fixed unit permanently on the site. All regulations that apply to a fixed abattoir of this size will apply to the TTA, so an official vet will need to be present. Our licensed slaughterman is local, and I first met him when taking sheep to the old Orkney abattoir. He has been involved with Andy Gray on discussions about the trailer design. We're including a hide puller and carcass splitter in the slaughter trailer, so that one slaughterman can comfortably manage 20 sheep in a session. There are rightly many regulations concerning the slaughtering of livestock, processing of meat, and dealing with waste products. Animal welfare, food safety, and environmental sustainability are extremely important to us. I've been working over the past year with Food Standards Scotland, Scottish Environment Protection Agency, the Animal and Plant Health Agency Scotland, and their animal byproducts team, and soon Orkney's Environmental Health. A year ago, I had the first meeting with Food Standards Scotland, and I found them helpful and encouraging. They quickly grasped this new concept of a tiny abattoir that could be moved to operate in different locations and made some helpful suggestions. An abattoir of this tiny scale is a first, so agencies are having to work out how various rules and regulations can best be applied in this case, and that means progress isn't quick, but things are progressing, with the building of the units about to begin. And no one has yet said that our deadline of early 2026 is unfeasible. Waste disposal is a big issue, and discussions are ongoing, but we have now identified a couple of possible options that should be affordable and achievable. Yes, the cost issue. A key feature of the tiny trailer abattoir is the capital cost, which is going to be less than £150,000. A fraction of the cost of a conventional fixed small abattoir, and we are getting infrastructure that can be moved, operate in different locations, and can be used by any farms and communities that can get their site licensed for it to operate. The Orkney Borough Cooperative will own the abattoir and hire it out on a not-for-profit basis to those, including my own Burnside farm, wanting to use it. This is essential infrastructure for an island community, bringing direct benefits to that community, so it shouldn't need to be profitable to justify itself. My husband Paul and I have been working and saving for my abattoir fund since 2018, and we now have between 1/3 and 1/2 of the capital cost that we're about to deposit in the Orkney Borough Cooperative's bank account as a donation. The cooperative is going to source the remainder of the capital cost in grants from organisations and individuals with an interest in animal welfare, rare breeds, and supporting crofting and farming in the remote parts of the Highlands and Islands. As well as North Ronaldsay using the tiny trailer abattoir each winter to slaughter their sheep, we've already had several queries from other farms and isles. This first tiny trailer abattoir will demonstrate that there can be an achievable and financially sustainable means to have the sheep slaughtered in areas of the Highlands and Islands that currently have no local abattoir provision. And to conclude, if any of you happen to know of any groups or organisations that you think might be interested in contributing towards the capital cost, please let me know. You can contact me through the cooperative website, orkneyborough.com. Thank you very much.
So you see, there's quite a range of really exciting developments associated with North Ronaldsay and with aspects covering the whole of Orkney. Now, we've a few minutes for questions. We've got a roving microphone. Elaine will be able to take it round to you. If we can see a hand at the back there, on that side.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I think the microphone will come on in any second. It's working. Good. Thank you. A question for Jane. We heard last night in a talk from a person from the Faroes that all the slaughtering of Faroes sheep is done on farms rather than in abattoirs. What is it that's preventing that? What is it that's preventing that happening in Orkney, and how does your tiny trailer abattoir compare with what they might be doing in the Faroes?
Quite simply, it's UK legislation, and there is an argument that when you're looking at very small local abattoirs, of which there used to be hundreds, if not thousands, throughout the UK, that the regulation is disproportionate to the actual risk. Now, we are complying with all current regulation with the tiny trailer abattoir at TTA. And the important thing is that once the infrastructure's been paid for, it can move and it can go to other places. My hope is that we're a test case. We're doing something in Scotland that the Scottish Government isn't having to pay for and isn't having to take a risk on. And I am convinced that when it is operating, and North Ronaldsay is very important in this because they have so many sheep to slaughter, that people are going to see how it works. And I anticipate in the future an OV, the official vet, won't be required and can be replaced by CCTV, but people can use our TTA as the test case and explore how that can happen. So once we've done it, I think we're going to find that throughout the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, there'll be more than just the one, and they will be moving around and operating and providing on-farm slaughter. Just stay up here.
One over there for Elaine.
Got one here?
Oh, you take the one there first, and then we'll do the one over there.
Yeah, mine's just a very simple question. What number of sheep are slaughtered in North Ronaldsay each year?
Usually between 160 and 200.
That's it. And then Elaine's going to get one over there. And anybody else in advance want to book? If you can hold a hand up so that we'll.
Yeah, you said for the trailer abattoir that this is going to be a test case for the Scottish Government. Can they not be persuaded to put up 100k to make the rest of your funding, as it's going to be so useful?
If the Scottish Government has any money, it is very important it goes to the Orkney Mart abattoir. We are deliberately not applying for any grants that the Orkney Mart abattoir will be able to access. I've been contacted by various people in the government. There is one grant we've been invited to apply for, which isn't relevant to the Mart. This is as well as the Mart abattoir. It is so important for Orkney that all our livestock that can be slaughtered locally is slaughtered locally, and we are absolutely fully supportive of the Mart abattoir. They know all about us, and there are opportunities in the future if they wish for some collaboration for mutual benefit.
Yeah, thank you. This is for Michael. Coming from being a foreigner here, the seaweed back home and kelp was historically only used as fertilizer back home. Could you explain to me what was the value in money? Why was there big money in kelp? What was it used for?
It had various uses. The kelp was used. I think it was. Is that the question? Is it just me? No? Better? Yeah. I think it was soap production was one of the things. Glass was something. What was the other thing? I'm not a kelp expert, I have to say. I just know that it collapsed. But
It was just from memory, there's a wonderful book the late Willie Thompson wrote about kelp. It was to do with the Victorian industries, as I recall. Glass was one, I think soda, glass. In the Napoleonic Wars, the demand rose for two reasons. One was, I think, iodine with the war. But then the war, there was a blockade on the Channel, and it meant that imported kelp, I think they called it barilla, from Spain and Portugal couldn't come in. After the war, when trade resumed, the market collapsed.
Yeah, I think the figure I saw is that Orkney took in about £1 million during the 1700s. So that gives you some indication of the scale of this. I mean, some people made a huge amount of money during that period, and most of the landowners also were involved in shipping, so economies of scale. It was very attractive, and that's why several members from one family started buying islands in Orkney.
There's a story about that. In Kirkwall, the West End Hotel, it was originally built by a Captain Richen, who made a great deal of money out of kelp, and he wanted it as a townhouse. And occasionally the wealthy people used to bet. So one day there was a bet on about who could eat the most expensive breakfast. And Captain Richen's wife entered the bet, and £50 was actually put up. So in order to win, £50, the £50, there was a bet. To win it, she took a £50 note, put it into a sandwich of bread, and ate it. And then won an even larger amount on the bet. So there was these huge amounts of money coming in the kelp, and the population rose, as we've heard in North Ronaldsay. But then after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the market collapsed, the work collapsed, and that's why the lairds then looked for a different method of generating income for themselves and employment. And I'm just watching the time, and I think this is the time to round off, but to say, if you would like to raise a glass to the island of North Ronaldsay itself, which, as we've heard, has been the centre of so many remarkable developments, there's a chance to do it, because the toast today at the P.D. Kirk lunch, which is the first of a series of 5 lunches of Orkney Fair, toast at the P.D. Kirk lunch is indeed to North Ronaldsay. It's a 1 o'clock toast, which means you've just over 25 minutes to get there. It's £12, and it is an absolute bargain, as you'll discover, with soup, wonderful buffets, cakes, copious amounts of tea, and wonderful company. And in the meantime, warmest thanks to our team.